My name is Ghulam Azerbaijani. I am a member of Board of Trustees of the Cultural and Educational Center. On behalf of the board and the organizing committee for this event, I would like to welcome you all here. Before doing that, I was reminded of a few housekeeping work, so let me start with that, and then I'll come to the rest of it. I am asked to ask you to turn off your, maybe lower your cell phone. As you know, many of you know, Iran Cultural and Educational Center has been involved in teaching our children, some 3,000 of them so far, Persian language and our culture. This is an all-volunteer, non-profit organization registered in the state of Maryland. And from the beginning, our vision has been and remains to create an environment that young learners become an ambassador of our culture. We hope we have succeeded. Today, we are celebrating this quarter of a century of work, but we are also looking forward to the next one. And we need everybody's effort, everybody's input. I hope we also succeed. This event consists of a conference this morning and a gala tonight. The conference this morning is plenary session. We have a keynote speaker, and following that, we have one of the 7 panels in this room. The other 6 ones would be 2 sessions, each with 3 concurrent panels upstairs, room A, B, and C upstairs. The program that you have in your hand has all the panels, with the exception of one of the panels that is in Persian. All others would be in English. Appropriately, Persian conference should have at least something in Persian. So you would you will choose the panels that you like upstairs. My colleagues will guide you there. We have coffee and tea upstairs, restrooms, everything you need. Downstairs, upstairs. But after all these housekeeping, let me go to the plenary session of our guest speaker. The guest speaker here, you know him, you all know him. I have known him for, let me say that 45 years ago, I took a flight with him from Tehran to this very university. At that time, we were both 8. Dr. Karimi Hakak has been active in the area of work that we have been doing for a long time. He's a professor of Persian studies and linguistics and Persian language and culture in this university, and has been for 19 years in Washington University at Seattle. I may miss something, but I have known you too long. Well, the last count I have, he has some 19 books and hundreds of articles on the subject. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Karimi Hakak. He will be for us this morning trying to set out an overview of the major themes of this conference that will be following. And later tonight, of course, we'll be hearing for many of you and others as well. And today, of course, you have all the alumni that you like to see. Dr. Hakak.
Thank you very much, Azhar John. Good morning, everybody. Azhar, and forgive me, I keep calling him Azhar. He is a man. But we've been calling him that for, as he said, 45 years. Did you say 8? I was a little younger. It's so good to be standing here talking to you. I have been so impressed with the work of Iran Cultural and Educational Center ever since I got to know it, which is before I came to this university. In a real way, in a real sense, the Center for Persian Studies at the University of Maryland College Park and myself owe our presence here to ICEC. And let me explain why. It seems as though a student, and in my main talk I'll be addressing mostly the young generation, the younger generation, your children. The rest of you can listen in, but I will not be talking to you primarily, I'll be talking to the younger people. It seems as though in the year 2000, a student wrote a letter to the history department at the University of Maryland asking for one course in Iranian history. She made a very good case. We are heritage students, we want to know our history. The University of Maryland had nothing. Nothing in Persian, nothing about Iran, and no expertise in the history of Iran. Or, for that matter, the Middle East. It's changed. It's changed a lot since then. This was 2000, 13 years ago. The history department told her that she had to raise the funds of $5,000. And that's how I got the email that she had sent around, asking for $5,000 of donation for the history department at this university to hire someone to teach one course in Iranian history. Boy, things have changed. I entered negotiation with the University of Maryland, and in 2004, as you well know, the Center for Persian Studies, now the Roshan Institute for Persian Studies, because it's expanded, it's established itself at this university, is now an integral part of the curriculum of this university. I have had the honor over the years to see the products of ICEC. And let me right here thank Ms. Amina Al-Wabi and all the rest of you, but I know she has been one of the primary movers and shakers of this institution for the wonderful work they've done. There's still misspellings, by the way, but you've come a long way, honestly. And as you see, the heritage students, the Iranian Americans primarily, although we do have some Afghan Americans as well, have really changed this university and this institution in more ways than they can imagine, in more ways than I had imagined when I first came here in 2004. So again, it's one way where an ethnic group can have its impact on an institution that's open to change, considering the demand and the request that come its way. It's a wonderful feeling to contemplate that, because it seems as though, besides the Persian language, you, younger people in this audience, seem to have also internalized much of the Iranian culture, which is your parental culture primarily. One of the abiding traits of that culture has been a sense of anxiety, almost an existential angst about our place in history. And if you look around, the country that we call Iran these days, and that area in Western Asia, the Middle East, so many peoples have come and gone. The Chaldeans, Chaldeans, Assyrians, Elamites, all kinds of peoples. The Persians have stayed and survived, the Marines survived and thrived in the area. I think this gathering is the latest manifestation of the same impulse, of the impulse to transmit to the next generation whatever it is that you think is worth keeping in your culture. And you have my congratulations for that. So, oftentimes in Iranian historiography, when they broach this subject, they talk about secrets of Iranian survival. There's no secret. there are reasons. And the reason why I don't like the word secret and I prefer the word reason is that there's nothing mysterious about it. Of course, it's a very complex phenomenon. Why it is that the Persians have stayed there in that piece of real estate in the world? The reason is this anxiety, this thought, this concern, abiding concern that seems to have been internalized in Iranian spirit for as long as we can trace history. Perhaps even the rest of it being covered in the mist of prehistory. So when you see all these monuments and documents, let me name a few: Persepolis, Pasargadi, Sifri, documents, the Shahnameh, the whole literature of advice, the entire literature, epistolary literature that fathers and mothers through the ages have written to their offspring, to their sons and daughters. When you contemplate the Shahnameh, for example, beyond the battles, beyond the heroism, beyond victories and defeats and so on and so forth, there's a sense of identity. There's a palpable culture in the making. It's that culture that gets transformed, and one can argue for the better with the advent of Islam. So if I'm going to use a lot of imperatives, think of them as invitations to the younger generation of what I think they should be doing at this point. But one of them is to embrace all sides of their identity. Oftentimes, in the Iranian expatriate community, it seems like there's a preference for ancient Iran rather than Islamic Iran. I see plenty of beauty in both. And so, one thing I would be urging on you would be an imperative of inclusiveness. Embody your culture, embrace it in all kinds of ways, not just one way of it. Because your parents may be expatriate Iranians and they may have chips on their shoulders against this or that aspect of your identity. I think for you, the thing that befits your presence in this world and your presence outside of your traditional cultural basis is primarily to be absolutely inclusive. The whole question of heritage and history comes to play here. Heritage and history differ in ways. You not only have the Iranian heritage, but you can go and advance as far as you're capable and as far as your time allows to devote yourself to that, the history of your culture. And I think both sides of it are important. Whether the subjective notion of heritage, because it's yours, you love it, or whether it's history, because at least at this moment around the world, there are 5,000 scholars in all countries of the world, outside of Iran, mind you, who are working on a history that has something to do with your culture area. So as such, it's a very active culture, comparable in ways to Indian culture, Chinese culture, Arab culture, and many other main cultures of that area. So, whereas the land of Iran may be truncated today, it was a much vaster empire. Nonetheless, it's as vibrant as ever, it's as lively as ever, and you need to know about all sides of it. The subjectivities and sensitivities and sensibilities, as well as the objective, critical questioning that may illuminate other aspects of your culture. Let me deal only with modern aspects of it. Modern articulations of your heritage, my heritage, our heritage, are plenty. The moderns lack nothing and owe nothing to the ancients in their involvement, in the sense of anxiety for highlighting this culture, celebrating at times, criticizing at other times, modifying it, changing it, but always being engaged with it, keeping the engagement. One poem that kind of comes to my mind is a poem that we all read in our textbooks. It probably still is in Iranian textbooks. It's a little tale, Ranj Ganj, by Muhammad Taqi Bahar. Let me recite it, just to give you a chance to hear some Persian as well, and give you a little interpretation of that text. برو کار میکن مگو چیست کار که سرمایه جاودانیست کار نگه تا که دهقان دانا چه گفت به فرزندگان چون همی خواست خورد که میراث خود را بدارید دوست که گنج ز پیشینیان اندریست من آن را ندانستم اندر کجاست پژوهیدن و یافتن باشداست چو شد مهرگان کشگر بد کرد همه جای آن زیر و بالا بود نمانید ناکنده جای ز آب بگیرید از آن گنج هر جا سراغ پدر مرد و پوران به امید گنج به کاویدن دشت بردن رنج به گاوان بود بیر کندن زود همینجا همانجا بود هر جا که بود قضا را در آن سال از آن خوب چون هر تخم برخواست 70 تخم نشد گنج پیدا یعنی رنجشان چنان چون پدر گفت شد گنجشان It's a fault. It's one of the favors of La Fontaine, the 17th century French fabulist. But Bahar treats it and appropriates it in a way that makes it a completely Iranian text. Whether it's in the title Ranj Ganj or the imitation of Sa'di, which makes it indistinguishable from Sa'di's kind of poetry, or whether it's in other ways, because he is a master after all. Master versifier and poet. What's different is he's giving a new lesson. There is no treasure. There's no buried pot or vat or whatever it is that will be full of something valuable. But treasure is laid. The ranch, the toil that you may have incurred in teaching or learning Persian is your treasure. Bahar changes La Fontaine's fable into an idea of patrimony. It's no longer just a farm or a piece of real estate, it's your country. A generation or two after Bahar, the poets continue their engagement with this notion of what's worth keeping. Where's our treasure? And Mehdi Akhavan Salis, my late great friend, has a poem called Miras, which means heritage. And he articulates it in terms of a robe, a piece of clothing, a garment that's worth keeping. And there he talks about ways of keeping that garment and keeping it clean and keeping it away from what he called the impurity. However you may want to approach this, the fact remains that the engagement continues, but with a difference. And the difference is that, want it or not, you live outside of Iran. Be as Iranian as you can, but remain very proud of where you are. After all, the whole world is aspiring to be America. Not the political system, mind you, especially these days. But in terms of its openness, its inclusiveness, its receptivity, it's those virtues, those characteristics of this culture that we need to understand, appreciate, and embrace. So what I would like to reiterate here is the role that ICEC, Iran Cultural and Educational Center, has played in equipping you, in giving you the tools with which to do what I'm trying to recommend to you. You have learned the Persian language, and we have been the proud beneficiaries of your knowledge, because when I came here, fortunately we had enough students to have classes in advanced Persian as well as intermediate, as well as elementary. We did not have to teach everybody from the beginning, because you had done it already for us. So what I'm saying is, what you need to do is adopt the Persian language as your heritage, or the main component of it. Thomas Mann, one of the most intelligent citizens of the 20th century, the German novelist, has a famous saying when he was thrown out by Hitler, or Hitler came to this country. He said something. He said, "Where is your homeland now?" And he said, "The German language is my homeland." For you, it's the Persian language. It's that entity that you need to connect with, because it holds the key to cultural and literary, if you will, or whatever explorations you may wish to mount on. But this is the basis, this is the foundation of keeping your identity. So the difference between you and your parents' generation is that for them and for the parents before them and for many centuries before that, people may have had a piece of land, a piece of real estate, a country to claim as their own. You still can claim something of Iran, but by and large, you have to, if you want to remain and be guardians, worthy guardians of that heritage, what you need to do is connect with the Persian language, because it's the key to culture, it's the key to what you have to go through to be able to do what you wish to. And what is it that you ought to be doing? I think in addition to the academic aspects of what you have done, is a bonding. When I see you outside, you younger generation, and you all know one another, you all seem to know one another, that's because what you went through in your education was not just an education, it was not an academic endeavor, it also created a family-like atmosphere. And it's that family environment that has created the bonding that you have. So now, as grown-up young professionals, what you need to do, ladies and gentlemen, my former students, my loved ones, my sons and daughters, what I recommend that you do is do what Americans do here, networking, community building. You need to network. And what I mean by networking is really both in-group and out-group. Yes, with other Iranian Americans in various cities, and right here, but also with Chinese Americans, with Greek Americans, with Indian Americans, with Arab Americans. Expand those networks. This country will be more America. Will be closer to a truer union in this country once we have accepted and integrated all of the immigrant communities inside us. As such, I think you should celebrate your hyphenated identities. Iranian American, that's a very proud thing to say. It means all Iranian, all American, or can mean that. So community building, of course, ICEC remains your primary community, your childhood community. But now you need to take charge and you need to build on. It has facilitated your work, but you have no less, you probably have much more ways of facilitating your children or your youngest siblings in entering, in remaining, and celebrating their Iranianness as well as their Americanness. Your families, those of you who are already parents, and I know some who are, and those of you who are growing up, in addition to your blood family, blood relatives, you also need to establish contacts with your cultural families, cultural communities. In this way, ladies and gentlemen, you will be making links and connections with those perennial values and virtues that not only have defined and sustained Iranian heritage through the millennia, but have updated it, and that's an important aspect of it, updated it, made it new, and made it relevant in new ways to their own lives and their own times. You can see what is truly worth keeping and carrying over your lifetime and those of your children and your grandchildren. That way, you can move from being Iranian Americans to globalized Iranian Americans, and finally to globalized professional citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laycock. You have some cards on which you can write questions. If you have any questions for Dr. Laycock, he'll be here to answer. I'm sure here at the university, he answers so many questions every day. But let's see if you have any. Are there any questions here?
I'll be rapid if you have any.
give a talk that, everybody knows the whole subject. That's good.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Let's now move on to our first session. Plenary session is over now. It's basically our panelists to moderate that and run the rest of the show today. I am happy to introduce Dr. Iran Al-Badi, who has been known to all of you. So let's give the floor to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hancock, for your inspiring and uplifting remarks. It's really wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. It's my distinct honor to welcome our distinguished speakers, Dr. Catherine Ingo, Executive Director of National Foreign Language Center at the University of Maryland, Dr. Wiley, Director of Center for Applied Linguistics in DC, and Ms. Nancy Rhodes, Director of Foreign Language Education at the Center for Applied Linguistics as well. We cannot thank you enough for being here on a Saturday morning of a long weekend. We truly appreciate you being here, and we are honored and very pleased that you could come and share your expertise, your experiences, and your research with us. And indeed, our speakers come to us with a wealth of knowledge about language learning, and that is what we are all about. We are here just to hear what they have done and where we stand as Persian in the country, where the number, they have lots of data that they will share with you, and you will enjoy really and you will learn a lot when we leave this session. I would like also to thank my friend, Ms. Nancy Rhodes, for offering to coordinate this session. I'm really thankful to her. Now, before I invite Nancy to share with you part of contributions that Dr. Ingo and Dr. Wiley have made to the field of language learning, language development, heritage languages, and applied linguistics, I would like to just say a few words about Ms. Rhodes' background and work in the Center for Applied Linguistics. In her role as the Director of Foreign Language Education at the Center for Applied Linguistics, Ms. Nancy Rhodes oversees a variety of language, research, professional development, and program education at the elementary and secondary level school. Also, in her specialty level, she advocates for and conducts research on innovative language programs for young learners. Recently, she completed a federally funded national survey of K-12 foreign language instruction designed to provide a portrait of language teaching across the country. Ms. Rhodes is bilingual herself. She was raised in South Africa, Sudan. In Africa, because I've been to South Africa, that's why I mean that, I'm sorry. In Africa and also in South America, and she has taught both Spanish and English as a second language. Again, thank you so much for being here, and welcome.
Salam, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Iran Cultural and Educational Center. It's really a distinct honor, especially because Iran Amin is a dear friend of mine, and because the heritage center that you have is really a model cultural center for the country. And after hearing Dr. Karimi talk more about it, I realized it had and has much more influence than I ever thought. I'm delighted to introduce our two distinguished panelists who will talk about language education nationally and how the teaching and learning of Persian can be enhanced for the benefit of the country. Terrence Wiley is an internationally recognized researcher and scholar in the field of applied linguistics. He became president of the Center for Applied Linguistics in 2010. Coming from Arizona State University, his teaching and research have focused on language policy, language and immigration, bilingual education and bilingualism, heritage and community language education, and English and globalization. His recent books include The Education of Language Minority Immigrants in the United States and Literacy and Language Diversity in the U.S. He has taught EFL students from Iran in his early career and more recently worked with Iranian PhD students in linguistics. Thank you. Dr. Catherine Ingold is the Executive Director of the National Foreign Language Center here at the University of Maryland. She serves as principal investigator for two major projects, a federally funded project to develop e-learning materials in critical languages, and the StarTalk project, which we'll be hearing more about, an effort that sponsors summer programs for teachers and students in critical languages in all 50 states, and Persian is one of those languages. Her other interests include U.S. language policy, heritage language development, education of translators and interpreters, and language access as a civil right. Her languages in descending order of proficiency are English, French, Spanish, American Sign Language, German, Italian, and Portuguese. Wow, impressive. So I'd just like to provide a little introduction to our panel discussion. A comparison of languages taught in the schools in the U.S. with comparing that with census data on languages spoken in the U.S. indicates a mismatch between what is taught in schools and the heritage languages spoken in homes and communities. This panel will analyze this mismatch and address how federal and K-12 and community connections can overcome it to advance language teaching in the U.S. Looking at community-based programs outside of the public sector, such as the Iran Cultural and Educational Center, shows that these schools are positioned to connect with languages spoken in the U.S. and their communities. Recent federal efforts seek to make connections between public and private school language education and languages spoken in the communities. About 1 in 5 children in the U.S. grow up in bilingual households. These children learn English, of course, in school, but often can also hold a conversation in their home language, though they tend to struggle with writing or speaking about more complex topics in the language. Some colleges and universities, and now some high schools, have created what are called heritage language classes to help fine-tune the skills of students who are raised in bilingual environments. So for our panel, Terry will first start talking about research in the transmission of heritage languages, and I'll provide an overview of what's going on across the country with language teaching in general in the schools and where Persian fits in, and then Catherine will highlight the Persian StarTalk program as make connections that can be made to promote Persian-English bilingualism in the schools. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions. Okay, Terry, and we'll pass the microphone.
Salam, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today and basically to see so many people in the audience. That is a sign of what we would call linguistic vitality. As long as there are people who want to speak their languages, and as long as they get together and network, then languages basically remain healthy. Within the context of the United States, language has been one of the more controversial political topics for many years. In the United States, in much of our history, there was relative tolerance toward languages, particularly toward European languages. But all of that really changed substantially with World War I. And around that time, with the large German population in the United States, there was increasing pressure for people to kind of prove their Americanness. And so gradually there was a de-emphasis on some languages. Nevertheless, through immigration, many people keep coming here from all over the world. And the Persian migration, we know, in comparison to some migrations, is a little bit later, primarily a 20th century phenomenon. Many people started coming to the United States in larger numbers after 1965, which represented a liberalization of our immigration laws, partly as a result of the Civil Rights Movement. We know that up until 1979, that many Iranian students were starting to come into the United States. And revealing something about my age, I had the opportunity to teach some of those initial groups. I was in California at the time. And for a brief period, the Iranian students at U.S. universities were one of the largest groups. Some characteristics about the Persian population that are quite unique is it's a pretty highly educated population also. And that tends to be a factor that works in favor of retaining languages. But if we stop and take a look at a little bit of data right now, we can see that despite some of the things that maybe politically have worked against immigration, that we have had a steady increase since 1980. And Persian is not a top 10 language in the United States, but it is a top 20 language. Currently, in the U.S. population, about 60 million people can speak languages other than English. Sometimes when people read that in the newspaper, they say, oh my goodness, 60 million people can't speak English. But we know one thing about most of those people, about 98%, and all of you basically are bilinguals. And so sometimes there has been fear that English is under threat, and we know that English is the major lingua franca of the world right now. And it's increasing its presence in education around the world. So none of us who are in applied linguistics are very worried about English disappearing in the near future, threatened by other languages. So I thought that we would take just another look at a few factors. The Iranian population in the U.S. is, there are several major centers where we can find the population in metropolitan areas. California, around Los Angeles, is the largest group. But you can see Washington, D.C. here locally is still in the top 4 and explains why that you have been successful because you have a sufficient critical mass of people to have the kind of programs that you have for the last 25 years. Now, if we look at the United States Census is a primary source of information. There's a 10-year census that's done every 10 years, but more recently there's been a subsample of the U.S. Census that provides us with data, and that's called the American Community Survey. And we can actually get more information from the American Community Survey now about language that we can get from the every 10-year census. But one of the things we can see is that based on self-reported data, that those over 5 in the population are primarily good speakers of English. Children, younger people, tend to be better speakers of English, which we would see as a kind of normal phenomenon in an English-dominant country. But that group, ages 5 to 17, that are essentially in the school-age population, That's a group that is really going to determine the future of Persian in the United States. And it's the group that we should probably be most concerned about. I've had the opportunity over my career to work on different language populations in the United States. The elephant in the room in the United States is Spanish. And so Spanish has probably been studied to a greater degree than most other languages. Chinese is also a language that's getting increasing tradition. There are a few students who have studied Persian, but unfortunately the data are not as rich as that on other languages. And as we think about young students at universities, if they happen to go in the direction of language study, this would be a good thing for them to focus on in the future. So what we can share is information from other studies that have been done in Spanish and studies that have been done on other languages, and what we have learned from them. One of the foremost scholars is a scholar by the name of Alba, and I'm also going to be making some reference to the work of Ruben Rambau, who is a Cuban sociologist who has been studying language retention across generations. And there have been several major studies that have been done, and one of the things that we see is a trend, and this remains fairly steady over time, is that the third generation usually begins to pretty well lose facility in the language. Some of the major studies that were done on this started in the 1980s. A scholar by the name of Calvin Veltman, he argued that there was almost, regardless of what language we looked at, that there was a three-generational shift pattern. Other big studies have been done, for example, by the Pew Hispanic Center in 2004, also found this similar shift taking place. With a little broader base of languages, there was an immigration and intergenerational mobility study done in metropolitan Los Angeles in 2005, and this study followed people over time. One of the problems of the census is we can't follow the same person over time. We're just getting snapshots of what the population looks like. But in this particular study, they followed the same people over a long period of time. And they started finding some more detailed and a little bit more troubling trends across languages if we really start to look at something a little bit finer in distinction. Sorry, I'm looking at two different computers and trying to sync them both here. This is the typical pattern that we have seen, and if you notice, the second generation generally is bilingual, and by the third generation we really see languages really not being maintained in the United States. This thing, again, tends to be pretty consistent across all groups. But if we take a little finer look at this now, and if you begin to look at these distinctions here on the left side, when we look at how old was the person when they arrived, where were they born, there's a growing literature on what we call 1.5 generation now. These are children that arrived under the age of 12. 2.5 generation, and then what kind of family configuration are they in? Do they have one parent, two parents that speak the language? Do they have a grandparent? And but we can see that even by the 1.5 generation right now, there's quite a bit of shift taking place. The second generation here for this larger study, 46.7% are still able to speak the language other than English in the household pretty well, but their preference is starting to shift to English, which is not surprising if they're surrounded by English constantly. But where the drop-off now seems to be accelerating is in the second generation. The only data that we have that shows that this trend is going in the other direction are where children can be enrolled in programs, either as foreign language study or heritage language study, where these trends can be reversed. So this is confirmation that we're really denying ourselves access to a very important resource in the world. The majority of the world, even if English is increasing, the majority of people in the world can speak more than one language. And if we think how that positions the United States in terms of its ability to communicate with the rest of the world, its ability to do business in the rest of the world, this obviously isn't a good thing for us. In summarizing his conclusions about these studies, Rumbaugh noticed that even among the biggest single ethnic population within the Spanish group, the Mexican origin population in the United States, that even among this group that the language had died by the third generation. And that the death of the languages in the United States is not only an empirical fact, but part of a global process of language death. Many of the small languages of the world are being squeezed out by the big languages of the world. We know that among the Iranian population there are many minority languages as well. And how many of these are also being maintained? What's happening to them? So I think Rumbaugh has said something very fitting for us to think about, regardless of which language that we are discussing within the U.S. population. And that a language represents a scarce resource in the global economy. And that it really is incumbent on parents to try to pass it along to their children, that is a goal worth supporting. In the United States finds itself enmeshed in global economic competition. The second generation now growing up in America, and many American cities could fulfill such a need. And I'll now pass it over to Nancy. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is just briefly give you some background information on what's going on in public and private schools with regards to language teaching and where Persian fits in. The Center for Applied Linguistics conducts a national survey every 10 years of language teaching in public and private elementary and secondary schools. And we focus on collecting national and regional data about language teaching. And so far we've done the survey at 3 points in time, and the last time we collected it was the 2007-2008 school year. So this is the results from elementary school. So this is percentages of elementary schools teaching languages. And let's start, so we have public, private, and total. Let's start with the total on the right here. And if you look overall in 2008, overall it shows 25% of public and private elementary schools were teaching some type of foreign language. And if you look back over the trends, and starting in 1987, 22% of the schools were teaching languages. And there was a strong grassroots movement, a lot of pressure from parents who were beginning to realize they wanted their children to be exposed to other languages and cultures and really become more part of the global community. And we saw that increasing almost by 10% in 97, and things were going great guns even in the early 2000s. But by 2008, for a couple of main reasons, one, the downturn of the economy, and superintendents and principals were just looking for what could be cut. And unfortunately, languages tends to be one of the first things, along with art, music, and physical education. Languages probably is the first of those to be cut. And then also in the 2000s was the No Child Left Behind legislation, focusing on reading and mathematics. And what a lot of people thought that meant, a lot of educators thought that meant, was we have to cut other things out of the curriculum. And unfortunately, we know that if children are involved in learning a language, it actually enhances their native language skills. So we would want them to maintain those language classes, which will help them with their English skills. But that's not what happens. So we've seen a downturn at the elementary school. At the middle school, we also saw a decrease in language teaching by 2008. Luckily, in high schools, it stayed about the same. So about 91% of high schools are offering foreign languages. Now, this is showing all the languages, most of the languages taught in the secondary schools. So this is foreign languages offered by secondary schools that have foreign language programs. So at the top, you can see that Spanish is way up there at, I think it's 93%. And the red line is, the most recent is 2008, and the blue line is the 10 years earlier than that. So Spanish is maintaining its place. However, many of the other languages are decreasing. So you can see French is down from 64 to 46%, German is down, Latin is down, Spanish for Spanish speakers about the same, which also could be called heritage language. Chinese has increased, American Sign Language increased a little, Japanese decreased, and then all these are almost too difficult to register because their numbers are so small, but then Persian is now showing up, which is excellent in our survey, but still very low, of course, at 0.2%. So overall, this gives you a picture of, as Dr. Wiley was saying, the strength of Spanish in the schools. Another way, one of the major questions that we're addressing is what languages are being taught and what other languages should be taught in our schools. And one way of approaching that is to look at the most commonly spoken languages spoken as native languages in the world and then compare that to what's being taught. So you can see these are the 10 most commonly taught spoken languages in the world as native languages: Mandarin, Spanish, English, Hindi, Urdu, Arabic, Bengali, Portuguese, Russian, Japanese, and Punjabi. And then I put Persian here so you can see about how it fills in, compares. There are about 10 languages between Punjabi and Persian, so Persian is 20th, 21st, somewhere like that, at 56 million. And when you compare that to the commonly taught languages in the schools, there's overlap with Spanish and Chinese, and then of course English. But other than that, no major overlaps. And there's no overriding reason that says that we have to teach in our schools the major languages spoken in the world, but the comparison does illustrate that languages with vast numbers of world speakers are neglected in our schools. Another way of looking at the U.S. data is to compare it with the languages spoken by heritage language-speaking families. So this shows the top languages spoken in the homes in the U.S. And starting from the left, Spanish, French, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, German, Arabic, Russian, French Creole, Tagalog, Portuguese, Hmong, Polish, and Persian would be down here. In this case, Spanish is actually over 4 million, way off the chart. And then there is some overlap here: Spanish, French, Chinese, and German, the ones marked in green that match what's going on, what's being taught in the schools. A major issue that we're focusing on is that the languages spoken in our heritage communities can play a significantly broader role in our education system than they currently do. Hundreds of thousands of children come to school speaking their home languages, but our schools do little to encourage the development of those languages. What we know is that the dominant language of preschool-age children is often the language of the family and community. By the age of 5, children in these communities have acquired most of the linguistic system of the language of their parents and grandparents. With the exception of literacy skills, the typical 5-year-old heritage language student has attained a level of proficiency in his or her language that far exceeds that of students who have studied a foreign language for many years in formal high school or university courses. There's one model of language education that has proven to be extremely successful for heritage language students, and that is the model of immersion, or two-way immersion. In the two-way model, children who speak the heritage language and students who speak English are in the same class, both learning academic content taught through either the target language or English. Educators have said that it provides the best-known vehicle for the conservation of the valuable language capabilities that heritage language students bring to our schools. So that model is a success story in public schools for heritage language students. And as a bonus, it's also an extremely successful model for English speakers as well. To wrap up, there's one person who has done an extraordinary amount in the Washington area to promote the language and culture of Persia. And there she is. As you know, Iran, in addition to being the founder of this school and one of the great proponents of Persian education in the United States, also, of course, had a full-time job teaching in Montgomery County as an French immersion teacher and an immersion coordinator and an administrator in Montgomery County schools. But in addition to that, she also took it upon herself to help provide professional development around the country, and of course also helped out with StarTalk in a big way. And in the professional development, not only did she work with Persian teachers, but she also worked with teachers who were teaching English as a second language students. And one project she worked on with us, which is what this picture is from, she was helping us train math and science middle school teachers in the integration of language teaching and content teaching. And these teachers needed it because they had a lot more ESL students in their classes. And the teachers were from PG County, District of Columbia, Fairfax County. And she was helping them in integration of language and content, teaching measurement with non-standard units, and she was teaching it in Farsi in a way that they could understand the content of what she was teaching, math, science content, and the language, and really gave them an eye-opener as to what our students are going through when they don't speak the language. And then just, let's go to one more before we go to Catherine. And I was just talking to one other announcement. I was talking to a colleague at the State Department and mentioning that I was going to be at this conference, and he said, make sure they know about the new opportunity for a summer Persian study for college students. They're offering it in 13 languages, including Persian, and students from all academic disciplines are encouraged to apply. And they'll be offering classes in advanced beginning, intermediate, and advanced levels, and that's the URL where the application is, and the deadline is November 15th. Okay, so now we'll like Catherine to talk about StarTalk.
let you know they're there. Rita, do you have access to the program? Yes, so she can tell you if they're helpful or not. But in a materials development project for scarce languages, NFLC has been developing single text units, either to build reading or listening skills at a range of proficiency levels, if you're familiar with the ILR scale, from 0+1 to 3+4. And I just wanted to let you know what resources there are. Is that better? What resources there are for Persian in that system, and if you need the resources, we don't distribute them widely. We basically throw them over the fence to the government. But they are available to the flagship program, and we can make them available. We have a total of 305 texts with activities and translation and transcription and read-alouds in 305 for reading, 244 for listening, and 27 video learning objects, which are particularly fun because I think they're primarily based on soap operas. And people, the students always complain that they want to know what happened next. It tells you, and since these are primarily intended for adults, the preponderance are at the 2+3 and 3+4 levels. So if you're having trouble, if you're teaching Persian, you're having trouble finding advanced materials, that's a good resource, and I just wanted to point that out to you. But I'm mainly here to talk about the Star Talk project. And I wanted to I'll give you just a brief indication. Okay, so it's Star Talk is government sponsored. It's designed for students in grades K-16, so it goes all the way from little bitty kids to college. And it also it offers student programs, but also teacher development programs. And I would, since the programs are only in the summer, and they're relatively short duration, I would argue that the best contribution is made in the teacher development programs, really. And we have a whole set of Star Talk principles, which I'm sure everyone can recite to you ad nauseum. But we really try to promote in every way we can effective approaches to planning and delivering instruction in these languages. Where do we have Persian Star Talk programs currently, or where have we had them over the first few years? You'll see that student programs have been primarily in the DC area and in California, with one in Washington State. The teacher programs are a little farther, more spread out. A good number of the teacher programs that are listed here are programs designed for teachers of multiple languages, so that there may not be a critical mass to have a Persian teacher program in Star Talk in a region, but there may be, if you bring together the Hindi teachers, the Persian teachers, and so on, they can address their shared pedagogical challenges and principles and ways to and strategies for addressing them, and then work in smaller groups to apply those to their own languages. I think that I would really like to go to the discussion, but I'll say a couple of other things. One is that we're gathering information on what challenges exist and what success stories there are to moving from a summer institute like StarTalk to an in-school program. We don't nourish the illusion that a StarTalk program can do anything other than build or maintain or further interest on the part of the student. If we want our students to learn Persian, they have to have access to sustained, well-crafted, effective programs. And those programs need to be preferably in the actual school day. And we were just having a conversation beforehand, before the panel started, about this question of in-school, after-school. And the huge advantage, of course, of in-school is you get credit for it. It has access to all the resources of the school. It matters. It goes on their transcript. The potential of the after-school programs, we're finding that there's a lively debate going on in StarTalk, and I welcome your thoughts on it. On can you use the after-school programs, because parents are desperate, let's face it, for after-school care for their students. Can you use those after-school programs to really good effect if you can provide strong curriculum, highly effective teachers, and consistent offering? And that's a debate that's going on, but right now, because StarTalk does not support in-school programs, because right now it's a summers-only program, we are looking at what we can do to support high quality in after-school programs, to gather information on how after-school programs get established and how they maintain quality or enhance quality, and what they need. Are there things that we could develop in the way of materials and curricula and so forth that might help them? So these are all things for us to think about in relation to the teaching of Persian, and we'd be very happy to have that conversation. So I think the in-school programs are a harder hill to climb for a lot of administrative reasons, but ultimately, certainly, our vision would be to see critical languages, including Persian and other languages that are vastly under-taught in the U.S. for their world importance, taught with well-trained teachers, which StarTalk can help with solid curricula that have strong outcomes indicators and strong assessment tools aligned with them, and that lead to meaningful proficiency that students can then develop further in college and in their professional lives. And with that, I have a stack of StarTalk flyers that you can take. If you're, I urge you to look for the StarTalk PR or contact us. Get the kids in your community into Persian StarTalk programs if you can, and please do direct your community-based teachers to the StarTalk teacher development programs, because I think having that community of practice and having that time to devote to formal development of your understanding and your actual implementation of principles of sound language teaching could greatly enhance your programs. Thank you.
So we've received 2 questions already, and I'll start with the first one. How do you define speak well for a second-generation person? Good question.
Well, I think the question is who is defining it. On the census question, it's self-reported data. on an assessment instrument, there's usually a scale. It would depend on if this is a direct measurement or if this is just someone's attitude toward how well they think they do. One thing we know about self-reported data is that for educated people, there's a tendency to inflate one's ability. And for less educated people, there's usually a kind of stigma attached, and they tend to deflate their ability. So sometimes we do need these objective measures to really try to ascertain it. A debate, though, that's going on, I've been working for a number of years with people at UCLA and Los Angeles, and one of the things they're trying to do is to look at the differences that heritage learners have in their speech and in their writing, and to try to decide what's a kind of tolerable range of difference from what native speakers would do. Because as some of you may know, if you came from Iran and you've been here many, many years, and you listen to some contemporary Iranian speech, you may find yourself diverging from that, right? And so the children who are only primarily getting access through their parents, many times are speaking an older version of the language than sometimes, people are surprised. They say, well, you sound like my grandmother or something. But it's a good question, and maybe next time we come back and do a panel just on measurement. So we have some experts at Cal.
Okay, the next question is, how do you rank different key factors, for example, reading, writing, and speaking of a language?
I think the question is rank in what sense? Did the person who posed the question, did you mean what order do you acquire them, or what's more important?
Yes,
or?
what's more important? I mean, can you say that somebody knows the language, but when she or he doesn't know how to read or write it? I mean, how important is to know and to write it?
I think this is a very good question for all foreign language teaching. I taught an intensive course in China this summer, and one of the issues in talking to Chinese about speaking English and studying English is, what do you learn it for? And they said, to pass a test to get into the university. And I think that one of the challenges for heritage or foreign language teaching is how to make it real for the students. And we know that some people develop reading knowledges. There may be people interested in Persian literature, for example, who develop reading knowledge, but they may not have as much opportunity to speak. There may be other people who want to do business, or so I think to answer that question, what's the purpose? But we do know that the more that you can develop literacy in a language, that has positive benefits, sometimes beyond just the language. So, but it's also a good question in terms of, let's say we're going to have a summer immersion program. Do we want the emphasis to be on speaking, or do we want the emphasis to be on reading and writing? And I think if we're talking about a heritage language as a living community language, we want to get speaking in there in some form.
This is a question about the Montgomery County curriculum. What steps have been taken to add Farsi to Montgomery County curriculum? And that, I don't know. You're wrong. No.
It's a very good question. However, there is no desire right now, and we have people from Montgomery County Public Schools here because of the budgetary problems and also space. They won't introduce Farsi version right now. So there is no hope even for the next 10 years or in my lifetime. So, no, not even in my lifetime, because many languages are disappearing. After school, before school, they might offer it, and as Dr. Ingold said, and they are talking about that, really if we want to mainstream some of these languages, the best way to handle it is to offer it as part of the daily instruction, not within the daily instructional school system, but either before the school starts, the same as right now they have FLES program, or after school. And of course, not offering it only once or twice, but having it more than that, because we know how we learn the language. If you learn it just, for 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, you will never ever learn it. And I would like to add something to the question about speaking the language. I think the first step is really to understand the language and speak it, and then you can get into reading and writing. Because if you don't understand the language and you cannot speak a language, what is the use of reading and memorizing and then repeating whatever you have read? So that is my 2 cents. We have many questions. If you allow me, I think we need to, because we have breakout sessions, maybe if you could kindly just, email us the questions, and we will share the answers with those who just ask you those questions. And before we end, I would like again to thank our distinguished presenters who have shared with us a lot of data and a lot of good information that we can use and see how we can use them strategically so that we can advance language learning. Also, I would like to welcome and thank all of the presenters and participants here, especially our alumni and our students. I'm proud of you, and I'm so happy to see every single one of you here. And also in our community, we don't call it school, we don't call it a center, we call it a community. We empower our students. And today, as my helpers, if they could kindly come here, Lili Tajetini, بهناز رضوی، کامران پرتوی و شکیب پورفارسی. They were here to help out in everything that we are doing. Please give them
Thank you very much. Thank you. You will have other alumni in other sessions. So, Mr. Arbabi said before we end, we don't end here. We just go out and have coffee upstairs, and then we will have our other panels, which, as I mentioned, there would be 2 sets of panels, 2 separate sessions, 3 concurrent panels. So choose your panels according to that. So with that, thank you very much. See you.